All right, so jumping into our techniques here, now that we have kind of gone through an intro and we've talked about uh, the process of writing and the development of writing through the writing rope that we looked at, very similar to Scarborough's reading rope. We had that writing rope that looked at how we develop writing skill. And so we're looking at technique number 38 and 41 here. And this is in chapter 8 of the Teach Like a Champion book, excuse me. And so the first technique that we focused on in the PLC that we talked about was everybody writes. And so what everybody writes it's using formative assessment or formative writing prompts in the classroom throughout your instruction versus those summative writing prompts, right? Formative being that they're less formal, they're helping us to build skill and build thought and build idea versus sort of that assessment idea. We're using that to inform rather than to assess. This type of writing can be done before, during, and after any kind of discussion or reading. If you're doing the before, during, and after reading, you could also integrate this sort of before, during, and after writing aspect as part of that, because we are doing those first reads, the close read, and then the response. And so in that, you have a built-in sort of structure already for having those formative writing prompts go on. This type of work can be used to prompt further discussion. So having students predict ahead of time what might happen can help lead into further discussion. Did that happen? Is your prediction correct? And this type of writing can be used in conjunction with other techniques like cold call, show call, stop and jot, or turn and talk. And these are all kind of things that you guys may or may not have heard of. So cold call and show call are different ways that we can showcase student work or being able to call on students and have them share and show what they know, basically. And having other students kind of see and understand through that. And then stop and jot would be like something like during a reading or during a discussion, actually having them literally stop and jot down a few ideas. It could just be a single word or it could be a couple of words, but it helps them just to get those ideas, having that orthographic processing, that brain to hand sort of connection. And then the turn and talk is something that's really common that we use a lot in the classroom, where the kids actually turn and discuss with a neighbor, but sometimes especially for those kids who need a little bit more time to process information, turn and talk is really intimidating. So having them stop and jot, and then turn and talk can be a really effective way to allow them to process or think through an idea or problem before they're talking to a partner about it. So let's look over here at our different subjects, our prompts ideas. So these are just a few examples, and these are in the book on page 324. And these are just a couple that I pulled out to showcase here. So as far as an early elementary subject area or level, a formative prompt versus a summative prompt might be, how might Paddington be feeling in this moment? And we're highlighting that idea of might versus, based on this story, what are two character traits that describe Paddington? This is so concrete and it seems so sort of final. And then it's asking students to support their answer with details from the text, whereas this one is so is open-ended. It's less intimidating. Students don't need to feel like they're right or wrong because we're using words like might. How might Paddington be feeling? They're not. It's lowering the stakes for them. And this one is for an ELA subject. What might the figs be symbolic of in this chapter, and why do they keep appearing? And so looking at a symbol inside of a novel and asking students, what could this be a symbol of? What might it be a symbol of? Versus explain how Esperanza's doll functions as a symbol throughout the book and what Munoz was attempting to accomplish with this symbol. And so again, very final, very summative. Like I said, it's very much an assessment question. So these are very much like what you might see on a standardized test. These are the types of things they're being asked to do. But helping them lead up to those summative prompts, you might want to think about using something like this, a little bit less final and with a little bit more open end. The rationale behind this is that lowering the stakes a little bit increases student participation. It gives students think time, and it allows students to develop ideas before sharing throughout a lesson. And then, like I said, it lowers the stakes and it helps students more willing to take risks in writing. So ideas for implementation, we talked about stop and jot. This can be done before, during, or after reading a discussion or a lecture. We can ask students to jot down a few ideas, and at this point, we're ignoring any kind of errors in spelling or grammar. Using starters and frames, and we're going to dig into this a little bit deeper, how we can use starters and frames in different ways when we get into the art of the sentence. And then allowing students to use bullet points or create lists, because some may not quite be ready for that sentence yet, or the sentence might be something that's going to take them a little bit more time to get out. We're going to dig into the art of the sentence here in just a minute, but getting them started with bullet points can be a really good way to get those ideas flowing. All right. So the next technique that we talked about was the art of the sentence, AOS. And so unlike the other one, which was a formative writing tool, this is a developmental writing tool. So this is writing that's designed to build syntactic control through deliberate practice, and that comes directly from Doug Lemov. So this means that with the art of the sentence, we're focused on building some of those basic syntax and structural skills of written language. So if you think back to that writing rope, we are looking at some of those different strands: syntax, structure, transcription can even be part of that. And integrated into that, we have that critical thinking is a huge part of this this particular technique. Being able to condense ideas down into a single sentence is a difficult and complex task, and it's not easy. The art of the sentence is also about the artistic application of grammar skills without necessarily using a textbook or sentence diagramming, which, if you ask me, is a lost art. I love sentence diagramming, but not everyone does. So with the art of the sentence, we're using scarcity combined with depth of content. Now, what does that mean? So depth of content is something that we're always forcing students to have, right? Deep understanding of what it is we're reading, we're talking about, we're listening to, but then we have scarcity. So something that is in short supply. Basically what we're doing is asking students to limit the amount of time that they have, or the amount of space they have to express themselves. And what that does is make them condense their thoughts into much more concise and thorough sort of strings of thought, right? Instead of things like, and we can go into this next example here that I have, which is, we go from something like this, and this is in the book again. They're talking about the book Because of Winn-Dixie. And so they have an example student response that says, "I love this dog. He's cute and I want to play with him. I want to throw him a ball and let him fetch. I'd like to see if he wants to tuck in beside me and watch a movie." So there's nothing wrong with that, other than that we want the student to be able to sort of take what they're saying and condense it and really build it into a single thought, because when we're able to express ourselves in a single thought concisely, it's a much more effective way to communicate, right? So I love this dog because he's so cute, and I imagine us playing, me throwing him a ball to fetch, or else the two of us tucked in on the couch watching a movie. That's a bit of a more concise, artful, easier to read, and the syntax and the structure and the grammar is a bit more complex, right? We're asking students to take something and make it, even though it's being shortened, it's actually more complex. All right, so implementation. So this is coming from page 342 of Teach Like a Champion. I talked about sentence starters with the implementation of the last technique, number 38, the everybody writes. With sentence starters, and we often think of sentence starters as being this way that we can scaffold instruction and that we can sort of differentiate for students who might be struggling writers. So it can be both a useful tool for that, especially if it's kind of a very brief, sort of easy to follow sort of sentence frame or sentence starter, but you could have more complex sentence starters that the sentences, you could push them into using unfamiliar syntactic territory, basically. So this example that they use is here on page 342. So they're talking about math, right? And like, again, use writing and math. That's important because they need to be able to express themselves no matter what content area. So the example is summarize the data from this graph in one complete, well-written sentence that begins with the phrase over time. This is asking the students to take on that perspective of over time, right? You could use things like growing exponentially. The line expresses the function, the relationship between in the long run, when the line approaches vertical. So these are all different ways that you can integrate those sentence starters as you're using this. The next one is sentence parameters. So use of specific vocabulary words in a sentence and limiting the number of words, etc. So asking students if you have sets of vocabulary words that you're using, and which I know my view has a lot of specific vocabulary built in. So if you're responding to some kind of reading, asking them to use those vocabulary words in that response, or limiting the number of words. So in something like in a sentence of no more than 8 words, tell me about the character's feelings in this particular part of the story. And that makes the students really limit and think about what it is they want to say and kind of think about like all the different aspects of things that are extraneous, things you don't need to say, words you don't need in a sentence, and then being able to combine thoughts, right? And finally, the last we have here is non-denominational, which asks students to capture a complex idea in a single sentence using phrases like in a single beautiful sentence, or in a single well-written sentence, or in a single artful sentence, right? You're pushing the students to think about how their writing can be creative, even if it is responding to something like math or science. And things to remember for this is that you're going to expect errors. So this is a developmental exercise that is meant to push students to try new things. We're often needing to combine the art of the sentence with revision practice, support students with error correction. This is not going to all happen at once. It's going to take explicit teaching of this skill. More often, probably the first 4 to 6 weeks of doing this would probably take actually having them do it with you, writing a single sentence with them, having them model using your own sentence as a mentor text, basically. A lot of I do, we do, you do to get this really pushed to do this because it's not an easy thing to do. But having students be able to express themselves in a single sentence can be one of the most effective forms of expression. And I want to point to an example from, it's according to lore, Ernest Hemingway won a bet with friends to write a novel in 6 words. And the 6 words that he gave us were for sale, baby shoes, never worn. There's a lot that's said just within that one 6-word sentence, right? That evokes a lot of emotion and it makes your brain go all over to a lot of different places. So a single sentence can be really effective. And then there's some citations if you wanted to look at any of the videos from Reading Rockets, and Steve Graham is really a great resource. But thank you guys, and I will see you next week.